First of all, giving all honor and praises to the great and omnipotent Yah. I'm honored to be here and to represent my colleague, Prince Amiel, Prince IL, and just have a few short words. And when the brother spoke about Dr. King's speech in Memphis, Tennessee, and he said, I had been to the mountaintop. Of course, everybody knows the speech. Say, I may not get there with you, but we as a people will get to the promised land. Well, what a lot of our people didn't know was that we landed in the promised land 2 months after that speech. So Martin Luther King did achieve what he dreamed for us to get to the promised land. And we've been in the promised land for 50 years as a sovereign called the Kingdom of Yah, which was not religious, it was a spiritual reality realized by all kinds of men and women who put their hands and their hearts and their minds to the concept of freedom and autonomy. So we left in 1967. So we don't necessarily espouse to the 1619 to the 2019 because our freedom was actually realized in 1967 when we left America, deliberately to set out to establish the seeds and grow the seeds for a new world. We want to thank everybody involved in this event, and I like the title that we put our minds together. So tonight we experience all kind of cultural realities and songs and dances and colors and sights. But the question is, after all of that is done, who protects the realm? After all that is done, who pushes the geopolitical reality of us as a sovereign people? Because we're not slaves anymore. There was this perception created by Europeans that all black people were slaves in America, and that's categorically not true. Because there were many black people who were here before the Europeans got here. And just as an addendum, I don't know how many of you have conversations and somebody black would say, well, my grandmother was Cherokee, or my grandfather was Sioux. And I would ask them the question, well, what does that make you? Well, that doesn't make you African American, does it? Because the reality of it is that before Europeans came with the power to define, we were all the same people, doing different kind of dances, wearing different kinds of culture, expressing ourselves in different ways. And so we celebrate the reality today that we have been in Israel for 50 years. And now what we had to come to terms with was that Europeans only had one job, and that was to keep us out of Israel. Now, I ask you, if we've been there for 50 years, who won that war? Because we had children, grandchildren who were born free. And I pray that at some particular point you would engage us in conversation so that we could understand the magnitude and the power of a free people who were ex-African Americans who became attached to the Israelite or the Hebrew Israelite culture. Now, in closing, I listened to a lot of the comments and conversations, and we don't have any more time. I mean, we're singing and dancing and doing all these things, and I don't know how many of you have understood the reality of the rolling back of a lot of the affirmative action scenarios. And in the Supreme Court, as we speak, they're arguing where did the statute come from that Byron Allen pulled up to deal with Comcast. Now, the Supreme Court said they weren't going to hear the merits because he had won in the Ninth Circuit. But the Supreme Court said they weren't going to hear the case on his merits. They wanted to know how other people were going to be able to use this statute, because that statute was to guarantee that ex-slaves had economic equity in America. That is in the Supreme Court now, and they're not talking about continuing to ratify it. I'm just letting you know. So when we're talking about the seriousness of the times, I can't say anything more serious than who's protecting the realm. I applaud the sixth region and the concept of the sixth region because it has allowed us to come together from all different places in the diaspora, and we should continue to do that. But at the end of the day, when we look at what we term Africa, and it's happening all over the world, there's one thing the Europeans had when they decided they wanted to rule the world that caught everybody by surprise. Because most people were dealing with parochial, most nations were dealing with parochial wars, skirmishes next door or whatever. But when the European showed up, he showed up with something distinctly different. He showed up with what was called the mentality of conquest. And that is what we are dealing with today. So who protects the realm? Who protects our realm? That's what we have to come to terms with. So in closing, 2 questions. And I'm not saying we need to answer them, but I'm just saying there are 2 real things we have to come to terms with going forward as a people and going forward as protectors of the realm. One is, are we prepared to go to war with Europeans? Or are we prepared to deal with people who continue to sell out to make sure Europeans maintain their economic domination over us? So I don't have to answer those questions, but there are those things to think about. So in closing, I thank you for allowing me to share these things with you, but we have no time. If you think we have time, all you have to do is pay attention to the geopolitical landscape and the sentiment that enough is enough on this planet. We no longer govern ourselves by Eurocentric ideas and concepts. That doesn't mean, that's not racism by any stretch of the imagination. So I thank you for allowing me to talk to you, but who protects the realm? Thank you.
Thank you for your words. It's a very important question. Because nowadays it's not enough to have a black person in an office. You have to be that black person that looks out for the black community in that office, and that is not always the case. Speaking of the office, there